The official report will say it was a bear. You read the incident reports and think you understand the risks of wandering off the trail. But the paperwork is just a story we agree to tell, a necessary fiction to keep the parks open and the panic managed. The real protocols are for things that don't leave tracks, for places where the map stops matching the ground, and for ensuring there's a body left to find it all. The initial call came over the radio as a 1057 Victor, a dead body, which in my jurisdiction usually meant one of three things: a heart attack on the ascent, a bad fall from a ridge, or a hiker who'd misjudged the season and succumbed to exposure. Dispatch placed the location 3 miles up the Serenity Creek trail, deep in a section of old growth fir the locals just called the holler. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, grew unnervingly still the deeper I drove the Park Service truck up the fire road. It was the silence I noticed first, a profound, almost pressurized quiet that swallowed the crunch of my boots on the gravel when I finally had to park and hike in. No squirrels chattering, no jays scolding from the canopy. It was the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. I found the county sheriff's perimeter tape stretched between two massive Douglas firs, a garish yellow violation of the deep green and brown. Sheriff Bill Brody was standing over the scene, his arms crossed over his substantial gut, his face set in the kind of grim patience that comes from seeing too much of this. Two of his deputies were taking photos, their movements slow and methodical. Brody saw me approach and gave a curt nod. "Chen," he grunted. "Glad you could make it. We've got a nasty one." I looked past him to the body partially covered by a tarp. What I could see was bad enough. "What are we looking at, Bill?" "Black bear," he said, the words coming out flat and certain, as if he were reading them off a script. "Came upon the hikers' camp, looks like. Wrong place, wrong time for the poor fella. We'll need your signature on the preliminary for Fish and Wildlife. Get the public advisories posted at the trailheads." I nodded, my professional training taking over. My eyes weren't on the victim, they were on the ground around him. I started a slow, spiraling walk around the scene, my gaze sweeping the packed dirt and layers of fallen needles. I saw the hiker's tent, a nylon dome torn to ribbons. I saw a cook pot knocked over, its contents spilled across a flat rock. But what I didn't see was far more important. "Where are the tracks?" I asked, crouching down. The ground here was soft and loamy. A 200-pound man left clear impressions. A 400-pound bear, agitated and aggressive, would have left a mess of churned earth and distinct prints. There was nothing. The leaf litter was disturbed, but not in the way an animal would do it. It was scattered. Brody sighed, a long, weary sound. "It's been a few hours, Alex. Wind kicks up in this valley. The air is dead calm, Sheriff. Has been since I left the station," I countered, standing up. "There's no scat, no hair snagged on the tent fragments. Nothing to indicate a predator was even here." My gaze drifted from the ground to the trees ringing the small clearing. That's when I saw it, the damage. A thick branch on a nearby aspen about 10 feet up hadn't been broken, it was snapped clean off, the break a perfect, flat, 90-degree angle to the trunk. Higher up, another limb was bent into a shape that defied the fibrous strength of the wood, an impossible curve that should have splintered it. "And look at this," I said, walking over to one of the younger firs. A long strip of bark had been peeled away from the trunk. It wasn't shredded, the way a bear would leave it after a territorial marking. It was gone, removed in a single, continuous ribbon that spiraled neatly up the tree. The exposed wood underneath was pale and smooth, with no claw marks gouged into it. I turned back to Brody. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had hardened. "This wasn't a bear, Bill. I don't know what it was, but the signs are all wrong. The environmental damage is too precise, too geometric. This place doesn't feel right." The pressurized silence seemed to intensify, pressing in on us. One of the deputies stopped taking photos and looked from me to the sheriff, a flicker of uncertainty on his face. Brody took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Ranger, I've been sheriff in this county for 25 years. I know what a bear attack looks like. My men and I have secured the scene, we've made the determination, and now we're processing it. The official report will say it was a bear." He held out a clipboard with a preliminary incident form attached. All I need from you is a signature confirming you were on site and concur with the wildlife assessment. It wasn't a request. It was an order wrapped in procedure. He was stonewalling me, using his authority to close a door I had just begun to open. The weight of his stare was heavier than the unnatural quiet of the woods. I looked from his unyielding face to the impossible angles of the broken branches, and then to the clean, empty space on the form waiting for my name. To sign it was to endorse a lie. To refuse was to challenge something much older and more entrenched than a single county sheriff. I signed the form. My signature, a tight, angry knot of ink, felt like a forgery of my own principles. Back at the station, under the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights, the memory of the scene in the holler played on a loop in my head. It wasn't the body that haunted me, it was the chilling orderliness of the chaos, the unnatural snap of the aspen branch, the spiral of peeled bark, the profound and listening silence. My report, now filed and official, made no mention of these things. It mentioned a male black bear, estimated weight 400 pounds, exhibiting defensive-aggressive behavior. A fiction I had co-signed. Sleep offered no escape. I kept seeing that blank space on the form, Sheriff Brody's hard stare. Professional duty is a clear path. You observe, you record, you report the truth. But what do you do when the truth is the one thing you're forbidden from reporting? My career was built on evidence, on the clear language of tracks and scat and territorial markings. The story I endorsed had none. 2 nights later, fueled by stale coffee and a growing sense of complicity, I let myself into the station's records annex. The digital database was pristine, searchable, and, I suspected, thoroughly scrubbed. I needed paper. I needed the files that predated cloud storage and keyword searches, the ones that gathered dust and held the faint scent of mildew and cheap ink. Using the incident number from 2 days ago, I cross-referenced the location Sector 7 Baker, the official designation for the Serenity Creek watershed. Then I started pulling the old accordion files, going back decade by decade. It took hours, but then I found it. 1990, a hunter, reported missing. Found 3 days later. The file was thin. The cause of death, according to the coroner's report, was massive trauma consistent with a bear mauling. The wildlife ranger's concurrent assessment was a single page. The text typed on what must have been an old manual typewriter. It was terse, lacking the ecological details that would have been standard even then. Tucked behind the report, I found a crime scene photo that had clearly been detached from the main evidence log. It showed a tree in the background, and on it, a familiar, impossible spiral of missing bark. My blood went cold. I kept digging. 2006. A young couple, camping, another bear attack. The report was more modern, computer printed, but just as sparse on wildlife specifics. The sheriff on that one was a younger Bill Brody. His signature was less weary, but just as firm. Then I found a file from 1988 for a missing botanist. Official cause cougar attack. The attached wildlife report was barely a paragraph long, and in the margin, written in faint pencil, were 3 words, almost erased, angles are wrong. This was the pattern, not of animal attacks, but of incomplete stories. Each incident in Sector 7B was a ghost, a narrative with vital organs missing, leaving only a hollow shell of official jargon. The protocols were there, just not in the regulations manual. They were in the gaps, in the missing pages, and the erased pencil marks. The next day I drove out to see Maeve O'Connell. She'd been the head ranger here for 30 years before I arrived, a living piece of the park's institutional memory. She lived in a small, sturdy cabin that overlooked the Badlands on the park's eastern edge, a place of wind-scoured rock and gnarled juniper. She was in her garden, humming to herself as she methodically weeded a bed of herbs. Her face was a roadmap of sun and time, but her eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. "Alex," she said, not looking up from a stubborn root, "didn't figure you for a social call." I stood there for a moment, unsure how to begin. I was at an incident a few days ago, up Serenity Creek. Maeve finally straightened up, wiping her dirt-caked hands on her jeans. "Brody-esque jurisdiction?" I heard. "A bear." The way she said it, not a question, but a flat statement of the official line, told me she already knew what I was there for. "The scene was wrong, Maeve," I said, the words spilling out. No tracks. The damage to the trees made no sense. It was quiet, too quiet. Brody had me sign off on it. She just nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant, hazy line of the mountains. Bill Brody is a practical man. He's not interested in questions that can to be answered, only in problems that can be managed. But what is the problem? What is being managed? I pressed. I went through the old files. This has happened before. The reports are empty. Maeve led me to her porch and poured 2 glasses of iced tea. She let me sit in the silence for a long time before she spoke. You're a good ranger, Alex. You know the science of the woods. But there's a difference between managing a forest and keeping a peace. Some boundaries aren't on any map. They were here long before us, and they'll be here long after. Our job isn't to chart them. It's to teach people not to cross them. Her words were as cryptic as the scene itself. I don't understand. What's out there? That's the wrong question, she said, her voice dropping, becoming serious. There are some things in those hollers that you don't look for. You don't try to name them or understand them. That is like trying to understand the tide by yelling at it. You respect its territory, you learn its habits, and you keep it from being disturbed. The protocols the old-timers passed down to me, the ones I passed down to Bill, they aren't about winning a fight. They are about not letting one start. She tapped a finger on the weathered railing of the porch. Those rules, the important ones, are always written in pencil. That way you can change them as the seasons change, and they don't leave a mark that draws the wrong kind of attention. I left her cabin with more questions than answers, the weight in my gut heavier than ever. Maeve hadn't given me a truth I could file in a report. She'd given me a warning. This wasn't a conspiracy to hide a predator. It was a generations-long effort to appease a place, and I had just announced myself by kicking the door down. Maeve's words about seasons and boundaries stuck with me. You don't try to name them. It was a philosophy completely alien to my training, which was all about naming, classifying, and understanding. But the pencil-written protocols she spoke of, the ones designed to avoid a fight, suggested a strategy, not of investigation, but of observation. I checked the almanac. The next new moon was in 3 days, a time of traditional darkness when the forest returns to itself. I went back to the holler off the books, parking my personal truck a mile down the fire road and hiking in without a headlamp, letting my eyes adjust to the faint starlight filtering through the canopy. The silence was waiting for me, a familiar, heavy blanket. This time, however, I noticed its texture. It wasn't an absence of sound, but an active suppression. The snap of a twig under my boot felt dull, stolen by the air before it could properly travel. My own breathing sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. As I neared the clearing, the air grew colder, a localized drop in temperature that had no meteorological cause. The sheriff's tape was gone, but the sight was unmistakable. The torn tent, the scattered gear. The county had left it all, a quiet monument to a story they wanted no one to question. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, my hand resting on the smooth, pale wood of the fir tree that had been so unnaturally peeled. The wood was cold to the touch, colder than the surrounding air, like a bone. I stood there for what felt like an hour, just watching, listening to the nothing. And then I started to see it. It began at the center of the clearing, a subtle shimmer in the air, like a heat haze on a cold night. It wasn't a creature, it was the place itself. The light from the stars as it passed through this specific pocket of space seemed to bend. The straight lines of distant pine trunks wavered, their edges softening. My scientific mind scrambled for an explanation. A thermal inversion, a pocket of swamp gas causing a lensing effect. I picked up a small, flat stone and tossed it underhand toward the center of the shimmer. I saw it fly, saw it arc downwards. I never heard it land. Not a thump, not a rustle of leaves. It just vanished from the world of sound. I took a cautious step closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could see the torn nylon of the hiker's tent more clearly now. A loose flap, fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel, passed into the edge of the shimmering zone. As it did, the edge of the fabric frayed. It didn't tear, it dissolved, the threads breaking down into a fine, smoky mist that dissipated instantly. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the slow, phantom breeze pushed the flap further in, and more of it was simply unmade. This was the truth. This was what Brody and Maeve and a generation of rangers before them were protecting. Not the public, not really. They were protecting reality itself from a place where it had grown thin. The hiker hadn't been attacked. He had wandered into a cyclical unraveling, a spot where the rules of physics took a brief scheduled vacation. The impossible angles on the branches, the spiraling bark. It wasn't the work of claws, but the signature of physical law breaking down and reforming incorrectly. He wasn't a mauled, he was erased. The pressure in the air intensified, and a low, sub-audible hum started to vibrate through the soles of my boots. It was the sound of a place coming undone at the seams. I realized then that the silence, the hush as it began to form in my mind, wasn't a void. It was a symptom. It was the sound of all other sounds being consumed. I backed away slowly, carefully, my eyes locked on the shimmering, silent void in the heart of the woods. This wasn't a predator to be hunted or a beast to be put down. It was a condition, a territorial presence, as natural and as incomprehensible as a black hole. Maeve was right. You don't fight the tide. You learn its schedule, you mark the high water line, and you build your house somewhere else. The bear story wasn't just a lie to prevent panic. It was a parable, a simple narrative to keep people away from a truth their minds weren't built to contain. It was a form of appeasement. The drive back from the holler was a blur of asphalt and trees, but my mind was stuck in that silent, shimmering clearing. The world felt thin, like a photograph you could poke a finger through. I didn't sleep. The hum I felt in the soles of my boots seemed to have taken up residence in my bones. The next morning, running on pure adrenaline and bitter coffee, I walked into the county sheriff's office. Brody was at his desk, buried in paperwork, the picture of mundane authority. The air in his office smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He looked up as I entered, his eyes showing no surprise, only a deep, profound weariness, as if he'd been expecting me for 25 years. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I stood before his desk and said, I went back to the clearing. He put his pen down slowly, his gaze unwavering. That was off the record, Chen. And foolish. It's not a bear, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It's not a cougar or a wolf or anything that has in my field guides. It's the place. The place is wrong. The silence that followed was different from the one in the woods. This one was heavy with unspoken history. Brody leaned back in his creaking chair, the sound loud in the small room. He looked at me for a long time, really looked at me, as if assessing cracks in a dam. He seemed to see the lack of sleep in my eyes, the tremor in my hands that I was trying to still. He saw that I knew, and that the knowledge had already started to change me. Maeve talked to you? He finally asked, his voice gravelly. She told me some boundaries aren't on maps, I replied. Oh, and that the important protocols are written in pencil. A ghost of a smile, sad and tired, touched his lips. She always was a better judge of character than me. Sit down, Alex. I sat. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a simple, worn, leather-bound ledger. It was completely out of place among the modern office equipment. He opened it to a random page. It was filled with handwritten entries, dates, and names with short coded notes beside them. This isn't official, he began, his voice low. It never will be. There's a handful of us, always has been. The head ranger, the county sheriff, a few old-timers who know the land. We are not a department. We were a management plan for things that can to be managed. He looked out his window toward the mountains. What you saw up there, we don't have a name for it. The hush, Maeve's grandfather called it. It's cyclical, like a tide or a season. It comes and goes in certain places. Most of the time it's say dormant, but when it is active, it's hungry. It unmakes things. The lie is a tint for the public's peace of mind, not really. It's a containment strategy. If we report an unexplained phenomenon, we get ghost hunters and tourists with GoPros looking to be the next viral video. They go stomping through the woods, off trail, and they become the next incident. The next body we have to find. He tapped the ledger. A bear story is simple. It's terrifying, but it is understandable. It has rules. People respect a bear. They stay on the trails, they make noise, they carry spray. The story keeps them safe by giving them a fear they can comprehend. It works as an appeasement. The full weight of it finally settled on me. The empty reports, Maeve's cryptic warnings, Brody's stonewalling. It wasn't a cover-up of a crime, it was the maintenance of a fragile, necessary fiction. The pencil note in the old file, "Angles are wrong," as wasn't an accusation. It was a signpost, a quiet confirmation passed from one guardian to another across the decades. This knowledge, Brody said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, it breaks people, Alex. We had a deputy once, a good kid, who saw what you saw. He couldn't reconcile it, couldn't have put the world back together in his head afterwards. He sits in a state hospital now, talking about how the trees are whispering equations. He closed the ledger and slid it back into the drawer. The finality of the sound echoed in the room. He was offering me a choice, but we both knew there wasn't one. You can know something like this. You can either break under the weight of it, or you can pick it up and carry it. My old, clear-cut duty to the objective truth was gone, erased by a shimmering patch of impossible air. It had been replaced by a heavier, murkier responsibility. I stood up and walked out of his office without another word. Back at my own station, the world outside my window, the familiar trees, the solid line of the mountains, looked fragile like a painted backdrop. I sat at my desk, the keyboard cool beneath my fingers. I had a backlog of routine work to do, trail erosion surveys to file, budget proposals to draft. It all seemed absurdly trivial now, but it was the work that had to be done. It was the other half of the job, the public part. I opened a new file. My duty was no longer just to the truth, but to the lie that protected it. My signature was now part of a protocol written in pencil, a promise to stand guard on a boundary that no one else could see. No matter what happened next, no matter what I saw in the deep woods again, the official report would always say it was a bear. We began with the idea that official reports are just a story we agree to tell. Now we understand the profound personal costs of being one of the authors of that story. The weight isn't just in knowing the truth, but in the lonely, thankless duty of protecting others from it. Some protocols aren't for managing the wilderness, but for managing a reality that is frayed at the edges, ensuring there is a world left for the rest of us to believe in. These are the kinds of stories we explore here at Silent Whispers, the truths that hide in the margins of the official record. Now, I want to ask you, faced with the same choice as Alex, knowing the damage the full truth could do, could you sign your name to the lie and carry that burden? Thank you for listening, and until we meet again, be careful where you wander. We'll return soon to open that old leather ledger and examine another entry, one where the official report blamed not a bear, but a wildfire that left no trace of heat.